Okay, I think I will be rude and I will start. Before we get going with the next panel on the changing nature of quality in children media, now you understand the pattern. We have a little video. But then now I need something from you guys. We have distributed in the room earlier some survey. It's very important for us that you help us to fill them up. I know it's a boring thing to do, but if you hate the conference, if you don't like the food, if you don't like the location, we need to know. We're doing this for you, so take a minute before the drink at the end of the day to fill it up and leave it at the table. So now I'm leaving to the little video.
Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man. Sophia the First.
Sophia the First? And what do you like about that one?
I like the princesses.
Stan in Dog with a Blog. Just because he's a dog and he can talk.
Because he can spray bullets and he can kick enemies in one hit. They're dead. My favorite character is Binu from 2B and Binu. It would probably be Binu.
Binu? Why do you like Binu?
He's funny. And Spider-Man's never dead.
What do you mean?
If Lizard hurt, gets them bleeding, he's not even dead.
So Spider-Man never dies?
No, he's never dead. Probably one from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This guy named Michelangelo. He's just really cool because whenever he's trying to catch something, he'd always go on his skateboard and do cool tricks like grind on rails and stuff. Charlie, because she's cute and she's little. Phineas.
Phineas? So why do you like Phineas?
Because he has a weird head. It's triangle. His eyes are here.
Okay.
His nose is the end of the triangle. Peter Pan.
Peter Pan? That's a good one. Why do you like Peter Pan?
Because it's a boy that never grows up.
Would you like to never grow up?
Yeah.
Why?
Because then you could just stay young forever and have a lot of fun.
Sorry, I need the microphone again. I'm sorry, I'm so in a rush to do everything. I forgot to introduce David Kleeman. Mea culpa. David Kleeman, strategist, analyst, author, and speaker. David Kleeman had led the children media industry in developing sustainable, kid-friendly solution. In May 2013, he broadened his focus and is now developing a unique new global kids and family think tank as senior vice president of Insight Program and play evangelist for Play Collective. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Yeah, Play Evangelist actually is on the business cards. It really is part of my title. I am so thrilled that the Alliance has given me the opportunity to have this panel. It's been something that I've been thinking about for a long time in a couple different contexts. One is my work with Play Collective and our research and strategy work. But the other is I'm a governor of the Television Academy, the people who give the Emmys. And as I look at the way kids are consuming media right now, I have to think that our definitions of quality and our understandings of how things get made, what is important both to the child audience and to us as producers and to broadcasters and to other distributors, has to be evolving over time. And so I wanted to put together a panel of really smart people to talk about it. I thought it was bad enough that we had to follow the kid who wants to be young forever, but so I just wanted to frame it a little bit and ask a couple questions about what television is today and what it means. So, ready to watch some television? Okay, first you need the right food. Got to dress up for the occasion. Got to have a comfortable place to sit. And now let's watch some of what kids are consuming.
Have you noticed that people speak really fast in advance so they can say everything at once? Meanwhile, you just sound weird.
Is Vine TV? They're consuming a lot of, teenagers especially, tweens and teens are consuming a lot of Vine, 6 seconds at a time. Is that television?
Hi everybody, me and my buddy are here and we actually want to show you the Teen Beach review. We didn't get it completely pretty much fixed, but me and my friends want to show you it before we get completely started. So, yeah, me and my buddy been building it. Well, I certainly have. My friend didn't want to help because he didn't want to.
I built a roller coaster.
Yeah. And he's pretty funny.
Oh, crap.
Yeah. Me and my buddy have been doing Minecraft for about 40, maybe 6 weeks. That's how much I've had it, and I know lots about it.
You dropped the camera. Yeah, we know lots about it, but we haven't had it long.
Oh, so bright. Yeah, we're gonna edit this.
So that may get thousands or 10,000s of hits, but what about something that gets 181 million hits just on the original site alone? And I'll warn you ahead of time, you may want to cover your ears. I'm about 2 weeks behind in my trends, but here we go.
Ducks they quack, and fish go blub, and the seal goes ow, ow, ow. But there's one sound that no one knows. What does the fox say? What the fox say? What the fox say? Hacky, hacky, hacky ho. Hacky, hacky, hacky ho. Hacky, hacky, hacky ho. What the fox say? What the fox say?
181 million views for that. And it's interesting. If you look at those 3 examples that we just looked at, we had 2 that were user-generated, one 7 or 6 seconds long, and one, the actual whole video is about 10 minutes long. But you know, very rough production values, but the kind of things that young people are watching today. Let's look a little at the context of it all. Are kids still watching television? We have new research in the US from Common Sense Media that says that actually the amount of television, the box in the corner that they're consuming, is down by over 10 minutes now, so a substantial amount. Every box that sits, you know, on the furniture in the home is down. The computer is down, video games are down, DVD use is down, and the only thing that's up is mobile devices. Not up enough to change the equation and actually have an increase in overall screen time, which fascinates me. That it's the first time I've ever seen a drop in overall screen time. But you know, what they couldn't answer yet, what they didn't have the perspective to answer yet, there hasn't been enough time, is are they just switching devices? Are they watching the same things that they would be watching on the television on the mobile device instead? So who makes television today? Obviously, the telecasters continue to make television in different places, independent producers, but it's also the teacher next door. Look at Khan Academy. It's the gamer next door, that Minecraft video you looked at, the kid next door, the Vine that we saw. Who distributes it? And I got in big trouble when I last used this term, the legacy broadcasters. I came back after the session to find a tweet saying, he just called us legacy broadcasters. I mean no disrespect out of it. I just mean that you have been there a long time. You continue to be there. You continue to be kids' best friends. But there are other companies coming in, or other ways coming in and doing this now. You heard this morning from Amazon. We also have Netflix, we have Hulu, we have Russell here from Wonder Reel. There's a company out of Brazil, there's one out of the UK. They're just popping up all over the place doing this. YouTube and Vimeo, Instagram, Vine, Facebook. Where can I see it? You can see, and the short answer is everywhere. The box in the corner, obviously. Mobile phones, tablets, game consoles, watches, glasses. And if you've been in an airport lately or in a grocery store or at a gas station, there is no avoiding television. So the question that we want to try to get at today is what defines quality? And we're going to come at it from a couple different perspectives, but a lot of the different questions that we have to ask about what defines quality in kids' television have to do with, is it the production values? Is it the storytelling? Is it something in the creation of it? Or is it something in the consumption of it? I've always said that quality in children's television depends as much on the consumer and what they need and want at the moment as it does on what we're creating and transmitting. Everybody's thinking about this. This was a headline from the day before yesterday, that professional TV content is still king. And what they're saying is, for the moment, this this high production value content is really leading the way, but there's a lot of challengers right now. And then this morning I opened up my Kids Screen daily email, and Nickelodeon has just commissioned Ryan Seacrest to do a game show based on viral videos. Can kids identify how a viral video will end? Can they predict which ones did go viral and which ones fell short? So these questions are coming into the mainstream channels as well. And then, what's it about? Is it about the money, that it costs less to produce some of these things? Is it about the democracy of the technology? Is it about the length of the program, that kids are snacking more and sitting down and watching less? Is it about they can find genres that they can't find elsewhere? There are so many questions that we're dealing with now to figure out what we are as children's television makers, as children's television distributors, children's media distributors more broadly. So here's our panel, and we're going to launch right in from there. I want to introduce them one at a time and give them kind of a general question about why it is that I thought of them for this panel, what perspective I think they bring to it. And I'll ask you, even though I've been very long-winded, to keep answers short so that we have plenty of time for discussion and questions from the audience. Let's start with Kim Wilson from the CBC Children's and Youth Programming. And what I wanted to hear from Kim was about how a major public service media organization is responding to these changes in how young people are both creating media and consuming media, and the changing options for them.
Well, first of all, I love all the opportunity that this brings to us, especially being what I like to call a boutique broadcaster, which means we're not a 24-hour net. There's a lot of opportunity to come out of the fact that kids are watching different kind of content now. So for me, that's a big part right off the bat. And because, we love kids. That's just basically what we do at Kids CBC. We love kids. And if you love kids, you love what they do. And in every place they go and in everywhere they search content that they enjoy for whatever reason, there's something to learn in that. So I guess for me, when I'm as the programmer and the person in charge of kind of all the platforms in collaboration with my wonderful team, of course, it's really thinking about two key words, and they are content and context. So I still believe that content means something extraordinary. And I'm going to come back to that, but context, I think, is really kind of critical for this discussion, because context is so critical. It's way different now than it was, say, a dozen years ago. So, for example, 12 years ago, I launched a series on CBC called Spynet. It was a high-cost drama that we shot at the CBC. It was for a 8 to 12 audience, and we shot it the traditional way, and wasn't that awesome? And it did pretty well. It had, the hot word at the time was convergent. It was convergent, which would have evolved to several other words. But today, we're bringing it back. And how are we bringing it back? We're doing a series of shorts that are about 6 minutes long, and we're using a technology that's used for animators who make video games. Why are we doing that? There's a great cost benefit to that, but it's also the context, the culture in which kids are looking at that kind of content. They're playing these video games. They're looking at a lot of content online that's very different. So in the context of their lives, that content really actually fits in. Getting back to the content point, do I think there's relevance to high quality content? I will always believe, no matter what is happening in the digital space, that there is a place for that. Because there are things that you can do with script writing, there are things that you can do with how you shoot programs, there are things that you can do around pacing that take a professional eye and viewpoint. I think for us, the real challenge is, how do we look at what kids are looking at, the Charlie bit, the finger example, how do we look at that and try to figure out what in that do kids love, and how, as a content creator, can I apply that thinking about content and context, online, on air, all of those things.
Excellent. I think content and context is actually a great transition to Carolyn Wilson, who is teaching at the University of Western Ontario and also does some work with UNESCO around children and media literacy. So one of Canada's leading experts on media literacy education, and working with teachers to understand how to teach today's young people about media. And what I'm curious about in the way Kim's framed this, what do we know, either through kids or through the teachers who are working with them, about how children and young people develop ways of thinking about the media that's around them? And does it differ from, do they look differently at something that's going to be on a CBC and that's going to be the high production values versus what they sit back to do on a YouTube or a Vine? Or...
Okay. great questions, all of them. I might be a little bit hoarse, recovering from a cold, but I'm sure I'll survive. And great comments, Kim, as well about the content and context. This whole issue around quality and children's programming I find really interesting. And I guess I think about it in a couple of different ways as an educator. One of the things I was thinking about in relation to this question and the topic is that when we think about quality, you know, we tend to perhaps value some more than others, put some on a pedestal and denigrate others. And I'm just reminded by the fact that all of us, you know, probably have our guilty pleasures, right? Not that I'm going to divulge mine this afternoon, but I remember a priest friend of mine would say, you know, he's available to anyone, anytime, 24 hours a day, except it used to be on Sunday evenings because he would be watching Desperate Housewives. So, you know, I guess there are questions that we can unpack about what we get from the media, what needs it serves, what it gives us, and what it gives young people as well. One of the statistics that we talk about a lot in education is the fact that by the time the average student graduates, he or she will have spent 11,000 hours in the classroom, but 15,000 hours watching television. So if you add to that the number of hours that a young person might be involved with the media, we're talking about, you know, thousands and thousands of hours of media involvement. But in terms of media education and the work that we're doing, I do want to emphasize that media literacy education is not about protection from the media, but it's about preparation for the media and technology and life and work today. So it's not about, you know, any kind of moral panic. Media education doesn't work as a vaccination. You know, you get this and you'll never be affected by Charlie in the finger or whatever it might be, right? But we are more interested in those skills, in the analysis, in providing young people with access so that they can develop sort of a critical understanding and a creative practice in terms of their own media use. So very quickly, I'll just talk about a couple of things related to this. In education, we focus primarily on three key areas. We talk about the importance of looking critically at production, so who has made something, who's distributed it, who owns it, who benefits from it, who controls it, and then how is it created? What are the key codes or conventions that have gone into that text or that storytelling? And then a question for students would be also, how can I create a similar text if I'm interested in something? What are the skills? What's the knowledge that I would have to acquire? Another area that we look at is the media text or the content as well, the content and the context for a media message, looking at the way in which the media may portray or represent certain issues or individuals or groups, looking at issues of stereotypes and messaging and values, and the impact of those messages on audiences, which takes us to the third area, and that is looking at the topic of audience. How are audiences targeted? How are they marketed to? What media is reaching them and then how do young people respond to it? What do they get from the media? How do they use it? How do they take it up in their lives and in the lives of their peers? So those are a few of the areas that we look at quite closely with students. And I will say also in Ontario that media literacy is mandated as part of the curriculum for students from grade 1 through grade 12. And it's part of the English language and literature component of the curriculum. So it's a mandated part of the curriculum for students, and they do love it. But I think the important emphasis is to remember that it's not about protection, but about preparation for life and work today. And I'll stop there.
And these days, part of that preparation for life and work today is about creating media as well. And you'd mentioned that. And that's why I was very interested to have Sarah Grimes from the University of Toronto on the panel to talk about, she teaches a class called Remix Culture, and it has to do with, you look at how today's young people both consume and create their own media and taking bits and pieces from other places, mashing them up, sort of borrowing styles they've seen before, but also creating their own. And so I was wondering, she also works a lot with how young people represent, I'm mischaracterizing this, but create content that they put into games that they play and use. So it led me to wonder about how young people define quality when they are actually part of the content creation, that they clearly want to believe that what they are making is quality, and does that change how they what they create and how they create?
I love this question because it's a question that's currently driving a project that I'm working on with a number of other people, which was to try to explore elements of kids' media making, DIY media making, user-generated content in games and other media, and to try to understand those cultural dimensions. So what are kids getting out of it beyond the literacy aspects, including, but beyond the literacy aspects? How are they using it for meaning making, for socializing, for creating their own culture, and for making sense of the larger culture that they engage with? So the TV that they love, the characters that they love from video games, which is where the remix stuff really comes in. So in the project, immediately we've noticed the high prevalence of a dialogue with media that's made for children, in the media that kids make for themselves. And there's a huge variety in terms of what that dialogue is. There's copying, and then there's being critical, and then there's remixing and juxtaposing in really interesting ways. So this is an area that we're examining, and we want to look at exactly these issues of what enjoyment do you get out of it, and how do you gauge the quality. And one of the really important things that we've seen in a lot of the really popular sites for this type of thing, so to go back to games, which is the main area that I'm focused on in this collaborative project, a site like Scratch, which is all about making your own game and sharing it. And one of the really key things about the site, and I'll get to your question, it's all lead up. One of the key things about the site and what's made it really unique and really popular, and what the users express as really loving about it, is the social network kind of aspect of it. So when they come on, they immediately have access to other players. There's a lot of different tools set up for them to be able to see who's a big creator, who's been engaged as a star creator by their peers, and then they can learn from those people. There's good mentorship kinds of opportunities within that. There's rating systems so they can rate each other's games, but there's also comment sections, and the comments have been set up and are used in this site and a number of other of the sites that we're looking at, not just for the usual YouTube kind of comments of I love this or I hate this, but to provide constructive criticism. And so you get this environment of we're all practitioners, we're all developing our skills. So this is part of what we're seeing emerge as indicators of quality. It's hugely variable. It really, this idea of context being important is extremely important in terms of what kids are gravitating towards and how they evaluate them, and they're very generous. A person who's just starting out, who's trying something, will likely get support from communities if they understand that that's what's going on. And so it'll be, this is really great for your first game. This is really great for a remix game. So there's this context dependence to it that's really interesting. In terms of looking at remix media specifically, which is obviously something that I am interested in, it's really, it's fascinating. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can come into play. How long did it take you to do it? And if it took a long time to do it, that can contribute to being seen as more valuable, as better quality than something that was, just kind of slapped together. I just copied it and then changed the colors. It's so there's there's multiple dimensions to it, and it's something that we're hoping to have a better understanding of once the project is done. So they really
can look at a piece of media and say, I can identify this as something that was just kind of thrown together versus this is something you spent time on, and while it may,
Yeah, and when you look at discussions between the users, they'll have conversations about that, like, no, it took me a long time, or explaining the process that they went through, and in Minecraft, this is a big thing. If you just use the program, that you can just generate a giant structure versus making it block by block. And the block by block, both can be seen as impressive, but the block by block, that's hardcore, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to show the Minecraft video, because they're sharing these videos about how they make things. This one didn't get into a lot of explicit directions, but some of them get very specific about, if you want to survive the night, here's how you build a shelter. If you want to accomplish this, here's how you do it. And Kim, after Russell, I am going to want to come back to this question of the participatory culture, and if kids are used to being able to comment on other people's work and take it and play with it and remix it and put it back or share it with others. I'm interested in how a broadcaster manages that expectation in kids' lives. But first I wanted to introduce Russell Miller, who heads the Center for Intentional Media, but also is creating something called Wonder Reel that is it's going to be one of the over-the-top services, essentially, that is going to offer a subscription-based children's media to families that want something different. He's been looking all around the world for outstanding and innovative content, and is going to be bringing that to his service coming soon. And I really thought it was important to have someone from one of these new emerging services that's going out looking for content in a lot of different places, but also has the opportunity to provide a library, not a schedule, where people can kind of pull from it what they want. And so there are opportunities to do different things. So I just wanted to hear a little about how you're setting standards of quality and defining this as you look for content.
I knew you were going to ask that. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want to go back because Kim said something today, and she said on the phone the other day, which I think is really, really important and in a sense defines this project that I'm working on. And that's this context-content dichotomy. As it happens, for an entirely different reason this week, I picked up this book, and I can't remember what it's called. It's like in the Box of Pleasures or something like that. It's Anna Humes. Anna Humes. In the Box of Delights, right. Yeah. So she has this great line in there where she takes up this question of what's quality children's television. And the thing that leapt out at me was she said, quality children's television sometimes also includes quality rubbish. And I think that speaks directly to what we're talking about here. Sometimes rubbish is perfectly fine. There's lots of crappy cartoons that I love to watch if that's what I'm in the mood for, and they don't hurt me. And in fact, I've said this for a million years, but it's true. I've learned a lot more from Bugs Bunny than I did from any educational television show. I never would have known where Albuquerque was. So that's sort of just a general statement on quality. However, I keep getting asked this question. It's a perfectly reasonable question. How do you determine what counts as quality? And the true answer is, I forget if it was Justice Douglas. I don't know who said it, but I know it when I see it. And I think that I know it when I see it is kind of what underlines what everybody else has been saying. That it depends on who's asking the question. Is it professionals on the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences? Is it children's television professionals at the Prix Jeunesse? Is it kids while they're looking at other kids' work? Is it kids while they're looking at the work of beginner kids versus kids who are expert? I think it really it really varies. However, because it seemed important to come up with some kind of statement of what quality would be for our company, because people were going to be asking it. They are already asking it, and people who are paying money will ask it. Where I actually ended up was in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, because the Convention on the Rights of the Child talks about kids' right to free speech, their rights to self-expression, their right to have respect for themselves and for the culture to which they belong. And to me, those are the kinds of principles that will serve as an effective filter for us in identifying shows that we feel comfortable presenting to kids, and shows that we feel will engage kids in kind of a more profound way than maybe other stuff they're going to find on TV, which might be quality in its own sense or quality rubbish. But the kind of stuff that we're trying to do is to sort of bring an alternative, at least into the North American market, of, well, let me just, actually, I'm going to show, David asked me if I would bring a video, and it's kind of funny because the whole context of this, right, is 6-second vines versus long form. So what you're about to see is about 1.5 minutes of a film that I think is
almost an hour long.
Almost an hour long. But I think in this 1.5 minutes or so, it'll make the point. So. That's from a German film called 2.5 Heroes, which I saw at the Prix Jeunesse 2 years ago. And the thing that I love about this, and the thing that I think this minute and a half conveys, is that it's extraordinarily well made, for one thing. It's great filmmaking. It's a tremendously compelling story, even though I didn't set it up for you at all intentionally. You may not have understood exactly what was going on in that, but you understood enough of it that you're probably interested in finding out what happens next. And you also probably felt the surge of emotion that that character was feeling, as in fact what's happening is he's a developmentally disabled kid who discovers that his mother, who he thinks has been sitting watching TV, has actually been dead in that chair for a really long time. To me, that's quality. And the reason it's quality is because it's tremendous storytelling, it's engaging, it forces you to go beyond wherever you were when you sat down to watch television. And that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping we're going to be able to bring to kids. And I think right now it's the kind of thing that is substantially not available pretty much outside Northwest Europe in television.
It raises interesting issues of context, because you can do that with a service that parents buy into as a subscription.
Actually, let me just say one more thing, because there's one thing about your introduction that I meant to comment on. The way Wonder Reel is set up is there is a library. There's going to be we're planning to get to around 2,000 hours of content, but it's not a straight VOD service. They're not going to be like dozens and dozens and dozens of little pictures like when you go to Netflix. We're actually going to be programming a linear channel, not a scheduled linear channel. You can go in and out whenever you want, but programming a channel for every kid based initially on their preferences and then also on their viewing behavior as they go forward. So and this goes right back to the content and context thing. How can you, if you have all these kind of really interesting shows that aren't being widely promoted, that aren't like the things kids are seeing in other places, how can you find a way to get them in front of kids and get them to take a chance at seeing them, number one? And is it really possible to create for kids what for us when we were younger was a linear TV watching experience that was tremendously satisfying, and for parents and for adults altogether is the kind of experience that many of us get when we watch a channel like HBO? How can we sort of recreate the experience of sitting and watching great television by using digital technology to create that context for the shows?
But if we look at quality then as from the other side, from the perspective of the user, from the perspective of the child, and the quality is what the child needs at the moment, whether it's developmentally or what their interests are. It become harder and harder to do that, I think, because they now have all these options for finding what's quality for them at the moment, and they seek them out themselves. And so it becomes harder to, I would imagine very much for a broadcaster, to create that the water cooler moment, even for kids, but equally in trying to create a VOD schedule, personalized.
I think it's just different. It's not one's better than the other. It really is about changing times and where you're sitting on that spectrum. So while it's hard for a broadcaster to get as many kids sitting in front of the TV as it is everyone else, we know, although we do know from that recent Common Sense Media study that educational television is still the most watched in terms of traditional television times. But it goes back to what I said at the start. There's enormous opportunity. What the whole digital culture has allowed us to do is think differently. And again, as a public broadcaster who has limited time on air, I'm thrilled. Suddenly we're back in the school age space when we lost our school age time 5 years ago. Why are we there? Because kids are watching so much great content online. They're finding us. Even though we're not on air doing an enormous amount of stuff, they're finding us because we're putting great content on. It has a variety of different levels of quality. It's all different based on kind of the context of the experience, what the content is. So I mentioned Spynet. We're doing something very different with a show that we're doing called Ruby Sky PI that probably a lot of you have seen before, which is this amazing webisode series by Jill Golick that we picked up after a couple seasons. And the production values are super high quality because that's what kids are used to seeing in that context. So it's just, there's an opportunity presented to us now. And I think one of the key things, and I like what you said, Russell, about what you're doing in terms of programming almost linear that you can come in and out of, because I think think one of the opportunities here is this idea of customization. And as we go down the spectrum, and listen, again, you know, we love kids. Why wouldn't we love all of these opportunities? I'm thrilled that Amazon is in the game and doing some really cool things. It's awesome for kids. If you really care about kids, it's terrific. But then you want to apply that to your own company, brand, whatever, and make sure your brand is awesome too. And make sure you're thinking about where kids go and what they're looking at, because there are these opportunities. So for us, a big part, you know, we relaunched our preschool site a few years ago, and we customized it because we know on the online space it's very different. Not every kid's going to come and watch our network and say, I like this show, I like this show, I like this show, the way that I've scheduled them, but they might like 2 of those shows that I don't put back to back. So they can come and have a customized experience where they, you know, come and, you know, pirate stickers are on their website. They can stream in order that they want to stream. I think there's just, like, I'm the eternal optimist, in case you haven't figured it out. I just think there's lots of opportunity. I've been in public broadcasting for 20 some odd years. My mantra has been, oh, a door is closed. I'm always looking for the open window, and you know what? It is always there. So for me, when I look at this whole notion of content and quality and what we can do, I see endless possibilities for people to think about what kids are watching out there, and whether you're targeting a public broadcaster or whether you're targeting Russell and his company, there's just so many outlets to get that content out, but you want to be thinking about what is out there that kids dig. Why did they watch that one video 1.8 million times, or, you know, 16 million times you see something on YouTube? We have to respect that kids are on YouTube, they're watching content everywhere, and try to find the information in there that we can apply to our own areas, whatever those are.
So for each of you, how much is that kind of conversation happening? I mean, within a CBC, you know, as you start to put things together, but also in terms of how kids are learning and how they're using media. That question about what are they drawing? What are the gratifications that they get from a 6-second Vine, from a YouTube video, that they may not be getting anymore from a half-hour animation series or from the sort of traditional genres? Is that something that kids talk about? Is I watch YouTube, or I prefer to be in Minecraft because I get this, that, or the other?
Yeah, in some respects. I mean, the studies that I've seen that have explored those issues tend to focus on something, you know, like it's market research and they're focusing on a particular thing. What kind of seems to be coming out is it's a different experience of video, you know? I mean, you use video to talk to grandma through Skype, and you use video to leave messages for people, and it's probably a different, how kids are, how they're labeling things. I think it's still very much in flux.
And you feel like they segment them. This may also be a question for Carol. They segment them. They understand the difference between, I use a screen to talk to grandma, but I also use a screen to watch these, you know, my friends' Minecraft videos. And this, to me, by the way, is one of the reasons I reject the term screen time. When people talk about a study looked at children's screen time, it's a meaningless statistic, just because they are using screens for so many different things and in different contexts as well as content.
Yeah, sure, I'll comment on that as well. In terms of media literacy, speaking of screen time, we've sort of expanded the definition of literacy, obviously, to include print, screen-based, and electronic media. So it does go beyond, you know, only talking about the screen or only talking about print or what have you. And a couple of interesting things have been evolving, I think, in education in terms of young people's voice and their own creativity and their desires to produce. And that, for us, has been around digital storytelling. So actually giving young people the opportunity to tell some of their own stories about their own lives, their own families, their neighborhoods, their ancestors, because now we have the tools and the opportunity to do that. But digital storytelling isn't just about digital literacy for us, which tends to be about just how to use the technology. It does explore content and context, right? And the messages and values being conveyed, how issues and groups are represented, and who the audience is, what the purpose is for the communication, and who's receiving it, and so on. Some of that I spoke about earlier. But a couple of interesting sources for teachers are online. One of them is Murmur. I don't know if people have heard of that, but Murmur exists in Toronto and in other cities. You can do a walk through certain neighborhoods in Toronto. And if you come to a green ear on a sign, there'll be a code, and you can dial it there it is. There's one of the screens for it anyway. You can dial the code and listen to a story. You're just listening, so it's an audio story about that place, maybe a person in that place, something significant that happened. And it can be a personal story, it can be something historically significant, and you can be there and listen. And it's very creatively called Here You Are, H-E-A-R. So that's a wonderful example of students being able to contribute to something about their own lives and their own experiences. And that's what I think is really exciting about what's happening in new media now, and certainly in media literacy as well. Excuse me, because for many young people, some of the stories about their own lives, their own neighborhoods, the people in those neighborhoods have been unreported or untold, right? So it gives them the opportunity to do that. And you know, you're probably aware that Ontario is a very multicultural province. Toronto is seen as one of the most multicultural cities in the world. So for many young people, actually seeing their stories and themselves represented in the media somewhere else is significant. I remember interviewing students a few years ago, and one of them said that a storytelling project, a digital storytelling project, made them feel for the first time that they existed. Because prior to that, they didn't see themselves anywhere. They didn't see any of their stories really represented that were personal or about them. And just as an extension of that, I was reading other research that was done recently, and young people were talking about the fact that no one exists unless they're on Facebook. So unless you have an identity, you don't have an existence. So I find that very interesting as well in terms of how young people are portraying themselves, how they're representing their identities, the stories that they're telling, and so on. But Facebook takes us in a whole other direction, I think, so I'll stop there.
Which is fascinating to me in that the nature of storytelling seems to be changing. And I'm curious, Kim, if you, and Russell, if you're seeing this both in what people come and pitch to you, and Russell, as you've traveled the world for a couple of years looking at programming, do you see a change in the way stories are being told for television based on the multiple ways stories are being told in other parts of the media culture?
I would say the pitches in general aren't keeping up to that. But what I find interesting about it is I think back to the launch of Sesame Street and how at that time, all of a sudden, you know, there was not a lot of kids content on the air, of course. And of course, what happened was you saw kids watching these commercials, these short bits of programs. They watched commercials, and it was so exciting. There was so much flash of movement, and that was one of the cornerstones of the research at Sesame. Wow, we know preschoolers love watching these short segments, so let's concentrate on short segments. That was the beginning of all those short bits that we all remember and love now, that were these 1 or 2 minute or even 20-second clips that we saw on Sesame. So for a long time, everybody was doing that. And I've seen this evolution, as we all have, in terms of storytelling. A narrative like this works better. Short like this. Oh, this works better, this works better. And I think now in this era where kids are watching 30-second or 60-second YouTube clips, including preschoolers, with their parents, I think what we should all know by now, or should learn, is that there's room for all of it. Like, there really is room for all of it. So for me, I think we still get a lot of the more traditional series pitches, but, you know, I will say, I mean, I get quite a bit now because we're doing it, of the more innovative, interactive content on the school age side, because we're doing so much more of that. But I think there's way more room to look at what's working in these other platforms. And I would say at the top of the list is comedy or humor, by the way. If you look on what people are watching on YouTube, most of it's funny. And think, okay, maybe we need to infuse just a bit more humor in some of the stuff we're doing. But I think there's all sorts of opportunities. So our door is open for people who love kids, want to make awesome content in a variety of formats, because I do think there's lots of potential and opportunity there.
And are people bringing you more opportunities for the kind of engagement that we were talking about before, alongside their program, not just a game, not just a website, but ways that people can participate in the content?
Yeah, I think our strategy's always been very interactive, both in the scripting of a show and in terms of how we approach things holistically. As you know, CBC works differently, all the platforms work together, so I think that's just a given for sure. For me, it's more about a general participatory culture than it is a particular show that does one thing. So it's a way of thinking about your project in general. And it may be that a preschool project isn't that great to do stuff online. Maybe it's an app and a tour. Maybe it's something else. Like participation to me means so many things, but it's about thinking about the best extension to create that experience for the brand. Because going, forward, how you define your brand is going to be so critical in this, universe where kids are watching so much content everywhere.
Yep.
And I would say, just from looking at what kids are doing, being open to what kids are doing.
Yeah.
So being open to the possibility that they'll come up with some sort of practice. It might emerge online or in playgrounds and become a fad. That might be important, even though it wasn't planned and it's not part of the brand and the rest of it. So being, I guess, open and responsive.
Well,
would be
I partly agree with that, and I partly disagree with it, and here's why. I think that the very, very last thing that Kim was saying there, I think, is a general rule altogether, that whatever the story is you want to tell, whatever, or if you're thinking curricularly, whatever the messages you want to get across. Like, the first question is, what's the best medium to do this in? You can't take any story or any message and do it in any medium. So that seems to me, actually, hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's probably a fundamental principle of quality. The reason, the slight objection I have to what Sarah just said is that it leads to exactly the kind of thing that I think David was indicating before, which is getting pitches that are trying to catch up with and cash in on behaviors that have emerged spontaneously in electronic media. And I've seen this, 12 years ago when I was at Noggin, and I don't even remember what stage the internet was on yet then. But there was email, and we were all talking about convergence, and everyone was pitching us all these shows whose formats looked like whatever the state the internet happened to be in 12 years ago. And now those same people might come in and pitch a show that instead of being a traditional narrative is presented in 140 character Twitter feeds or something like that. And as far as I'm concerned, unless there's something about that, and I'm guilty of this too in curricular material I've written. I do work for the Metropolitan Opera, and I did an activity based on Rigoletto, and it was about the Facebook pages of the characters and how they talk to each other. It was really shameless, but I think that things that are authentic won't be trying to take some gimmick that somebody has seen in the culture.
That's not what I was saying, though.
No,
I'm not saying appropriate something that kids were doing for some other media
that's
or other practice.
Right.
Yeah, so you don't disagree with me.
So now I'm going to say where I agree with you even more than that, because one of the things that we decided to do early on, because we're on the internet and we're not just a purely, we're in a place that will support more than purely watching, is we tried to say, well, what else can you do on the internet? If you were doing television now, and television was being invented for the internet, what else could you do? So part of the site is going to be a mashup studio, where you'll be able to take any content on the site, and it's actually, the technical way of doing this turns out to be pretty tricky, but I won't go into right now. Kids will be able to take clips from video, mix them up, insert transitions, probably upload a new voice track, and then pass them back and forth collaboratively among other kids who are on the site. So that's one kind of possibility of ways that kids can actually play with the content that we're bringing them. And the other is social viewing, using a model that looks a lot like Google Plus Hangouts, where kids will be able to get in touch with their friends in another time zone, make an appointment, watch a show, and then have live real-time video chat, just like going over to your friend's house and watching TV. So I think there's a lot of things that if, and I was thinking about this also when Jocelyn was talking about the Moshi Monsters project, right? The trick is, what are the affordances of a technology, and how can those affordances enable you to present either a new version of the same experience or some new experience that might be meaningful to kids?
I want to leave time for a couple of your questions, but I actually want to jump into the audience for a minute. I've forewarned a couple people who are on the the YMA Awards executive committee that I might do this and just come out and ask if the process of choosing the YMA award winners has been at all affected by the growing number of different options that kids have in their lives. If you can imagine a time when YouTube videos might be eligible for YMA awards or Youth Made Media. Michelle, I see you smiling out there. I think you said you were going to be ready. Michelle Mellinson. Oh, there's a mic coming to you here.
I think it's emerging. I think we're getting there. I mean, I think it's interesting that we're already starting to see some of our web series and things come to the fruition. And you know, speaking of Ruby Sky PI, I mean, we're all aware of that program. That is a web series that's pretty much out on its own in terms of that genre and that age group, but we all know it, and I think we're all aware of it, and we also know the impact it's had on its audience. So I think we're all aware of that, and it's coming, and we're seeing those, whether or not we all feel in the award community that there's enough out there to compete against each other. But I know for myself, I would love to see a category where it's kid-made or kid-generated content. I think would be fabulous, and that would be a way to go. And I think what is important, especially a YMA award, for example, is that it really is celebrating our community, but really our audience as well. So I think it'd be really interesting. But I think it's just emerging, and I don't think there's quite enough out there. But I think a creator-driven kid content award would be awesome.
I can tell you from working also with Prix Jeunesse, the International Children's TV Festival, it's a real challenge to come up with the criteria that stand for the same things as the longtime criteria for evaluating television have stood for, you know, traditional television have stood for, honoring the new things that these options bring to the screen and creating fair ways to evaluate them. It's a great challenge, but it's a really
I know my
fun
10-year-old has a lot of great submissions in the Minecraft how-to
category.
Yeah,
yep.
You'd have several in those.
And that alone has been responsible for getting a lot of young people to become producers who never thought of themselves that way before. Any questions from the audience? Yes, Beth. Got a mic coming to you here.
Is just a comment, participating in the Japan Prize and also doing the Prix Jeunesse Iberoamericana, which is the Latin version. We are considering right now everything together. When we judge the what we call the audiovisual division, it's coming together as in Japan right now, games, webs, and everything together. And we got like a prize for the youth category in Japan Prize that was a game. And it was in competition with everything together, like series, live action series. And it was quite interesting, the discussion behind. So it's a challenge, but I think it's the way that we are doing, it's the way to do.
Did you feel that the criteria you were given for evaluating the submissions was adequate did it give you enough latitude to evaluate the difference between a game and a television show and a website?
Well, it depends on the jury, no? It depends on the jury. I think we still have a challenge because we have people coming from different backgrounds, and then it makes it a little difficult. But I think we'll find a way. It's just the beginning.
Other questions? I'm curious, we saw this morning some examples from Jan Willem Bolt from the Netherlands, and he's made a range of programs. Today we saw one of the more sort of highly produced ones, but he's also done some programs that he's shot on camera phones and things like that. Can you mix genres? Would you be okay putting on a program that was shot on a camera phone alongside a multi-million-dollar animation series and trust that kids will say, okay, I get it,
Well, again, I mean, I'm going to go back right to the start in terms of content and context. The short answer is yes. I pretty much would put anything on if I thought the content was great and that it was going to really make a difference in some way. Again, if you think of your audience or end user first and what they do, what they like, developmentally, where they're at, all of those key things, and it makes sense in that context, absolutely. And in fact, who doesn't love hybrid shows anyway, because kids love them. It's very similar to their lives in terms of how they move from different places and textures. I like to call them textures and feels. And it really really is about moving around, so it's very reflective. So absolutely.
And in terms of the streams that you're creating, it'll bounce back and forth in terms of.
It will bounce back and forth, but actually we were having a conversation about this just yesterday, and it's one of the things that we're hoping to do some testing on. Because one of the ideas that we have is to include, in addition to the kind of global dramas and kind of offbeat animation stuff that we're looking at, we're really interested in classic films that kids don't see very often. So I've been having conversations, for example, about including early Chaplin shorts and Keaton shorts in the site. And then the question is, if you're going to, which, sort of a different extreme maybe than a movie shot on a camera phone, but it's still visually quite different. And so, we were having a conversation about, well, if we include this in the stream, is there a way that we want to visually contextualize it to prepare kids for what they're about to see, so that they'll give it a chance. If the last thing they saw was Steven Spielberg's Tintin, and then they're jumping to to Chaplin and kind of jerky slow motion. I mean jerky, not slow motion, but because of the frame rate, it comes out looking differently. I believe it can be done, but it's definitely something that we want to test. Partly because we are going to be feeding, the word that folks were using a few years ago was pushing stuff to kids, rather than having them go in and pull it in a VOD kind of context. So, but I don't really see any reason why not. I mean, it's kind of postmodern, but so what? It's kids' lives. Like kids say.
Any last question? We have just about a minute or two if there are any questions. In that case, let me thank the panel for coming and doing this. It's something that we're going to be, I'm sure, dealing with on and on. Go out and make quality. Good. Yeah.